Welcome to chapel. Thank you so much for being here today. As I'm sure you realize, we have so many sacred rhythms and moments happening all at once. We, of course, are celebrating Black History Month. We have the Lunar New Year, the year of the horse. Woo! Today is Mardi Gras. You know, I keep repeating that to people. It doesn't seem like anybody knows about Mardi Gras. So I'm like, it's Mardi Gras. And people are like, oh, okay. I know, right? I'm excited. Thank you. Good. Yay. I mean, I'm so excited about Mardi Gras. I'm going to do the everything tonight, you know, because tomorrow we fast, right? We start with the fast. We have the beginning of Ramadan and also the beginning of Lent tomorrow. This reminds us that celebration and reflection, discipline for some, justice and renewal often unfold at the same time across our traditions and across our communities. Our chapel today is What is Your Life About? And it invites us to consider purpose, calling, and the ways our lives speak through what we love, what we resist, what we create and believe. I am so honored that Ani Zonneveld is here with us, and I am going to invite Afshin to introduce our guest.
Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum. So first, thank you so much to Sandra for making chapel such an inclusive space and always inviting us to join and participate in meaningful ways. So when Ani reached out to me and told me she had written her memoir, I was like, you definitely need to come to Union and talk about that because the work you're doing is so critically important and there are parallels between the work you're doing and the work we're doing at Union. And both our work and Ani's work is so important to our society, particularly in this day and age. So it's an honor for me to introduce Ani Zonneveld, who I met because she's president of Muslims for Progressive Values. She is an author, a writer, a singer, a songwriter, and a speaker. She is founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values, which advocates for freedom of expression and of conscience and human rights for all through an inclusive interpretation of Islam. Ani promotes these values through public education, advocacy, and the arts. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Multi-Faith Advisory Council to the United Nations, and a board member of Community Partners Foundation in Los Angeles. As an officiant, Ani pioneered MPV's Islamic interfaith marriage services and has officiated hundreds of weddings since 2006. She is the subject of an award-winning documentary titled Al-Imam, screened at the Cannes Film Festival in 2019. And as a Grammy-certified songwriter, she utilizes the power of music against hate and in creating a new Muslim American culture. Ani's memoir titled The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist, was published by Lived Places Publishing, July 29, 2025. Born in Malaysia, Ani is a Muslim since birth. She spent a good portion of her formative years in Germany, Egypt, and India as an ambassador's daughter. Her exposure to different politics, religions, and cultures has shaped her inclusive worldview. Ani, it's an honor to have you here today. Welcome to Union.
Thank you, Sheen. Thank you, UTS, for this invitation to come and speak about my book. The purpose, the title of my book is The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior and Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. I'd like to share a little bit about the cover of the book, and it is a painting by my oldest brother. And in it, it has a dagger, which is this very curvy zinc mixed metal dagger that we, in my culture, in the Malays, in the Malay archipelago, that's something that we have. And the dagger is a spiritual dagger. It protects you, the owner of that dagger. But there's a certain spirituality element to this dagger. And he called it The Warrior, and he dedicated the artwork to me as calling me the warrior. And this was in 1997, long before I knew what I was going to end up becoming, and that is running Muslims for Progressive Values and doing the work that I do. So my oldest brother had this vision about me before I knew what I was about. And I think that I was born in Malaysia. My last name is Zonneveld, and I think I have to explain that a little bit. Sometimes people wonder, why is this Jewish-sounding name, last name, running a Muslim organization? And that is my Dutch. My husband is Dutch, and that's his last name. But I'm born, raised Muslim, and that is also important to actually explain that, because a lot of people think, well, I'm not really a Muslim, because this understanding of interpretation of Islam is very different than what they understand in Orthodox and traditional Islam. But I think as students and as students here at this institution, I think it's really important to have a certain empathy in the work that you do and the studies that you take. And this is one of the reasons why I did this book. Whenever I was speaking at a university or a class, particularly when I was invited to speak at an Islamic studies class, whether it be undergraduate or graduate, or if I was teaching a class at a university in Switzerland on the ethics of Islam, it always seemed, I always noticed that students tend to really pique interest in the subject matter that I cover, because a lot of times they study the theory or the theological Islam, and they don't understand how that theology how that impacts society, individuals in real time, in real lives. And so what I bring to the class is basically explaining, when you have a theology that is perpetuated in a hateful manner, it doesn't matter what theology it is, you will get a society that is also imbued in hate. And hate is not benign, as you notice in our society today. Hate is not benign. There will come a time where that line to cross from just the belief in a hate, the language of hate, crosses into the action of that hate. So I've always challenged religious leaders, no matter who they are, but particularly if they're Muslims, I've always challenged them in their ideology or their theology of hate, because I do feel that it is a dangerous path to take. And it's a dangerous path to take your society and your community with you. And so, along the theme of hate and along with the inclusive environment that you have here at UTS, I will talk about my work when it comes to advocating for and standing up for LGBTQ rights in the context of Islam. And how this circles back into my upbringing and my purpose in life. I'm not queer, I'm a straight woman, married for over 36 years. But when I was growing up, I had an uncle that lived with us in all the different countries, because my father was a diplomat, so I lived for 16 plus years abroad in Germany, Egypt, and India. And my uncle was my mother's oldest brother, and he would be our chef, our cook. And there was this sort of indivisible wall between me and him. And obviously I was very young, but we lived together for 16 years, and I can't say I really knew him very well. But the one thing I noticed about him was that he was also the one to teach me about my traditional cultural dance performance. And I noticed that he was very feminine in when he was teaching me how to dance, but I didn't think anything of it. My parents also never spoke disparagingly about homosexuality, about other races, other religions, other ethnicity, nothing. That language of hate was never in our household or in how I was raised. It was always about, this is the diversity that God has created, and that's the beauty of God. And so accept, not tolerate, but accept that as being the divine creation. So this is the set of values that I was raised on. And so many years later, here in the United States in 2006, I was in Los Angeles, I was in the space where we had marriage equality, already a law in California, but there were efforts to overturn it. And people reached out to the Muslim community, and none of the Muslim traditional communities would be in favor of, they were in favor of overturning marriage equality, same-sex marriages. And so I ended up being in the space with inclusive and loving faith traditions of other faith traditions, Jewish, Christian, etc., who were affirming of same-sex marriage. So I ended up being in that space and advocating for LGBTQ rights as a Muslim, and in the context of the work that I do with Muslims for Progressive Values. And within that space, I started really learning to decipher who I really learned to get deep into the theology of the homophobic teachings within the context of Islam. And it was important for me to understand that if I was going to advocate for LGBTQ rights. And so, and I think if you're a student of Christianity, for sure you would also learn about the story of Lot, which has been misinterpreted as all about homosexuality, and that's why the whole city was destroyed because of homosexuality, when in actually it is really actually about violence, sexual violence, and rape, and also the tendency of that particular community to not be generous to immigrants, to refugees, and particularly in that particular society in the desert, if you are not given refuge as an immigrant or refugee, it's death because of the really hostile environment. And so it was for all these other reasons other than homosexuality that the story of Lot has been so distorted and, in my words, bastardized. And so, and then I had this feeling like, I wonder if my uncle was queer. And so I went back to my oldest brother and I asked him, hey, was Uncle Mabakar gay? And my brother, like, yes, he was, with this big smile on his face. And then everything started making sense for me, that invisible wall that we had between each other, like the don't ask, don't tell kind of thing, right? So at the end of the day, the purpose in life was also ingrained in me in how my dad lived his life. He was very stern about how we use time. And he made sure that, particularly me, I'm one of those young girls who was always very chatty in class and always very easily distracted. I was one of those, like, what you call FOMO, fear of missing out, I was that kind of girl. And so he was always making sure that you need to document, do a timetable of how you're going to spend your day and your week and your month. So that was the kind of treadmill that I was on, except for Sundays, where I was free of this treadmill and I get to rest, basically. And so because of my father's sort of almost militant discipline when it came to the use of time, but that was also because he came from that generation of negotiating our independence, the Malaysian independence from the British. And so his aspirations was like, we have to make Malaysia a successful country as a newly independent country, but all of us as children had to also follow in the footsteps of excelling in education and contributing back to society. So from a very young age, it was all about making the family flag fly high and never to do anything to stain the family flag, but also more so the country, the Malaysian flag. And as a diplomat's child, during that time, I wasn't allowed to wear jeans. I wasn't allowed to wear open-toed shoes. My hair was always in place, combed and braided. I was, groomed to be that model of representation, even from the age of 2.5 until my teenage years. So there was all of that ingrained in me and wired in me about representing your community, representing your country. And as an American here, and particularly if you're Muslim or if you're a minority, you are always representing your community whether you like it or not. And some of the struggle as an immigrant here to the United States is, where do you draw the line between your own identity, your own happiness, your own self-determination, and yet belonging to a community? And a minority community, there is a tendency to define what you are, how you're supposed to be as a minority. So where you draw the line is a really tight rope as an immigrant, but also as a minority living in the United States. Like, where do I draw the line? I want to belong to my community, but I don't want my community defining who I am, because I'm also American. I also have the right to self-determination and to this and that, the other, right? So there's always that struggle between your self-determination and so therefore your happiness. And by doing so, you're also defying patriarchy at the same time. Patriarchy is destructive on so many levels, not just for women and girls, but also for men. The expectations of how our roles are so binary, and that is not really a healthy binary. And so the work that I do with Muslims for Progressive Values transcends not just LGBTQ rights, obviously women and girls' rights, and I do a lot of work in empowering women and girls, particularly in very oppressed communities. So I work with religious leaders, but the religious leaders I work with tend to be very traditional and very conservative in their own way, in their own societies, but they are so adamant about uplifting women and girls' rights. And so I end up working with traditional imams in Africa, Burundi, DRC, and Rwanda. I've worked there for more than 9 years. And last year we worked with religious leaders and scholars of Islam, 400 of them in Afghanistan. And the work that we do through this Imams for She initiative is really reminding the religious leaders, hey, this is what the Quran says about women and girls' rights, about human dignity, and about the role of social justice, because that is how and why the Quran was revealed in the first place. So why is there so much oppression in Muslim societies? We've really regressed, we have really deviated from the teachings of the Quran. And so with the work that we do with the imams, we're not teaching them about, we're reminding them what the Quran says. We're reminding them that the Quran said, there's no compulsion in faith, or how women and girls have the right to self-determination, to work outside the home, to economic independence, to managing their own finances, to make the decision to marry, who they marry, when they marry. All of these bullets that I just listed is not what is being practiced in society, in mostly very conservative Muslim societies. And so when we remind them of this with these religious leaders, we're also teaching them the tools on how to engage with the general public, because they know the scholarship, they know the theology really well, but they don't know how to engage with the public. So we coach them how to do the sermons on Friday prayers and they engage with society, because it goes back to what I said. If you preach hate, you get hate. But if you preach egalitarian and universal human rights values, human dignity, you're going to get the society to also be imbued in those values. So the work that we've done through Imams for She, and how we also use that framing of work at the United Nations, so I do a lot of advocacy of work over there as well, utilizing the progressive and human rights framing of Islam. And I sit on the UN Multi-Faith Advisory Council, and the UN is an extremely secular institution, and so is the EU. And when I'm in those spaces, over the years we've gotten a lot of pushback about why do you raise Islam as a form of human rights when clearly Islam is the problem. Yes, the way Islam is being interpreted is a problem, but it is also a solution. If you're going to really move society, you have to talk in the language that resonates for them. right? And it's the language of faith. And a lot of secular funders and institutions don't recognize that value of the impact the religion or the language of faith, no matter what that faith is, on society. And so I think at the UN, because we're on the UN Advisory Council, we have been with other multi-faith organizations, we've been able to really bring back some of that positive religious language that the UN can utilize. And so we are, as an advisory role, we try to support them in that, in the way they implement their policies and their programs on the ground. I think that when it comes to, again, in the American context, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of disenfranchisement, and like, where is our country going? When it comes to religion, the work that I've been doing, we've always been challenging discrimination of women's reproductive rights in the United States, the right for women to make those choices. And also for LGBTQ rights. And what we've seen over the many years is how, because of the different administrations, it flips from one side to another, and it's a bit of a whiplash. And it's really remarkable that now we're still going back to square one after so many decades of so many rights moving in the right direction. So for an example of the work that we do is, for me, my purpose in life is empowerment of individuals, and it doesn't matter what who the individual is. I think that self-determination is imperative, and it is also in the American Declaration, like, you know, the right to happiness, and that, again, that happiness is really hard fought. You cannot be happy if you don't have that self-determination, and you cannot have that self-determination if you are curtailed legally from having that self-determination. And so we do a lot of work through, like, amicus brief filings. So here I go into the legal realm and how religion is being used to discriminate, and the role that we play as Muslims for Progressive Values is to counter the human rights violations in the name of religion. So when there is a case where a church is using religion to justify discrimination of LGBT people, we step in and file amicus briefs to support the LGBT constituency that is being discriminated in the name of religion. Or there's a group of Orthodox Jews in Florida that sued Florida because they made abortion a complete ban in abortion. So then we filed an amicus brief in support of the Jewish women that, because of their religious understanding and interpretation, they have the right to reproductive justice. And so we filed amicus brief in support of that. So as you can see with these few examples, that we're not just a Muslim organization that only care about Muslim rights. It's important for us to show up for others. And I think it's important for all of us to show up for each other, because that's the only way that we can overcome any form of oppression, any form of discrimination of the other. And, you know, in so many faith traditions, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. But sadly, we don't practice that. Fundamentally, we don't practice that because we only care about our own tribe or own particular ethnicity. And so my book is a way to challenge that tribal mentality. My book is it's full of stories of my upbringing, how my upbringing and my values, the way my parents raised me, has informed the way I think and my worldview and how I operate and how I run Muslims for Progressive Values, our philosophies. And so I can give you one more example, I think. Yep. So when I was living in India, I had a really first-hand experience of the caste system. And we had the in-house servant, and he was of a higher caste, and we had the Dalit, the untouchable, and he was our gardener. And the guy that was our servant, our in-house servant, would not share his cup and plate with a Dalit gardener. And because, you know, it's whatever his thinking is. So my mom made sure that we ate and drank from the same cup and plate as the gardener, just to make a point. So in theory, this is our version of the anti-racist. In the academia, you have this term. But this was, for me, was how I was raised instinctively. And another time, then my mother called me and said, Ani, I just want you to know that, people are talking because you are playing soccer. I was doing soccer drills with the gardener's son. And because I was the ambassador's daughter and he was the Dalit, it was not appropriate. And so my mother was sharing with me that people are talking. And so I'm like, yeah, so I don't care. And my mom said, no, I'm just sharing this with you so that you know what society is. And so that kind of informed me too when in California, when Hindus for Human Rights reached out to me, say, hey, Ani, do you want MPV to team up with us? Because we're really trying to push for including caste as a category in the discrimination law in California. And so we were able to get that passed through the legislation, but it was vetoed by Gavin Newsom, who's politically, I think he's trying to run for presidency, so just a note. But anyway, so my childhood experience of that informed me and sensitized me to the caste system and how it is really unacceptable that here in the state of California, the Dalits were being discriminated by the higher caste in Hindus in the tech industry, FYI. So all those dots are connected, right? We're all seeking self-empowerment, self-determination in order for us to reach happiness. But so many things get in the way. If it's not patriarchy, it's the caste system, it's religion, it's society, it's so many different things. And for me, my philosophy of Islam is, it's really quite simple. It is, I have to read it because I always forget it. Some Muslims force people to fit into a box called Islam, whereas I look at Islam as lifting people out of their boxes. So with that, I end my talk, but I'm going to sing a song to end my presentation, then we're going to open it to Q&A and then also to lunch. So during this work, one thing that I noticed about the American Muslim society is the sort of patriarchal and hierarchical structure within our faith spaces. And so it was important for me when we do our prayer services, for example, we don't segregate, we verbally describe the space before conducting religious prayers. So I would say families pray together in the center, and if you're not comfortable with this unsegregated space, men one side, women one side, and if you're a trans, you stand where you are comfortable. This gives the congregation the comfort from hearing it, the permission, the permissibility of standing and praying where they are as a human being and recognizing that, right? And so that's kind of like, and we call this form structure of prayer Mecca style, because in Mecca, the most holiest place in Islam, we don't segregate. Men and women pray side by side. We nudge, elbow each other because it's so crowded, and it's not an issue. So we're reminding our Muslim congregation and Muslim society at large of that. And the fact that a woman is leading men and women in prayer is also permissible because the first female imam was appointed by Prophet Muhammad, and yet that is not taught to us. And I'm sure you've learned a lot in this university, all the good things about religion that you are not taught in your traditions. And so that's part of the role that we do as Muslims for Progressive Values. And then the other aspect of it is, what is missing in our American Muslim landscape? And the one thing that is missing is music. And in Christianity, you have such a rich tradition of music in the form of worship. And so I felt that as a Muslim woman from Malaysia, where we have music, not in the form of worship, but in form of celebration of festivities, whether it's Prophet Muhammad's birthday, we've always had that in Muslim traditions. In Pakistan, they are so good at celebrating in the Islamic traditions. In Africa, you have this rich Sufi traditions that are so musical, and yet here in the United States, we don't have that in the Sunni tradition. So I felt that, well, let me create something that is what I foresee when I'm long gone. Hopefully, I'm planting that seed for the future generations to take on, and that is the musical tradition of an American Muslim Islam. And so I'm going to sing the song. The lyrics is from a poet that was born in the 700s. Her name is Rabia al-Basri, which was the city of Basra, where it's in Iraq now. And she was quite the poet and a teacher. Her poetry are amazing. You should look her up. And I love it so much because of it's so spiritual and inclusive in nature. She has poetry about finding God in the environment and so on and so forth. So this one, I've called it In My Soul. And what I did was I took the English translation of her poetry, and I put it to classical music genre because I'm classically trained as a pianist. So I decided to go back to my classical roots, and so I did the music and the production, and this is In My Soul. So if you could play the music, please. So, classic chapel, the ambiance here is so divine. You know, it's just so beautiful to sing in the chapel. Thank you. Any questions? Happy to answer. Yeah.
Thank you so very much. I just spent 40 minutes this morning torturing my poor class, trying to figure out the relationship between narrative and justice work. That's what we were looking at in that particular context. And then I come here to chapel, and with such love and grace and light, you've answered all the questions I had. Bim, bam, boom, no problem. I'm so appreciative. Thank you so very much for all of this.
What is your name?
Booker.
Booker.
So my question is a bit redundant because you've already answered it, but I'd like to ask nonetheless. What would you say is the relationship in how you tell your story and the work that you do? And if the work that you do, does it continue to refine that narrative? Is it a relationship that continues to grow? How would you talk about it, even though you've already talked about it?
Yeah,
today?
no, I mean, thank you for that, because there's a lot that I did not cover in my presentation. So I'll give the example with a lot of the social justice work. We have to justify it in the name of religion, in the name of Islam. Because I'm a Muslim woman, I'm not a bearded man, I had to really build that foundation theologically to justify all our 10 principles. That was really key. Unfortunately, there's a lot of progressive theologians and philosophers in Islam, and so it wasn't a difficult task to do. So a lot of our theology and the work that we do in social justice is very much justified in the name of Islam and the human rights framing of Islam. So, for example, when people talk about why do we feel that it's important for girls to go to school or for girls to have an education, when in some societies the narrative the Imam preach is that what's the point of educating girls when they have to be married off as soon as they hit puberty, right? But that's not how Prophet Muhammad advocated for women and girls' rights. The first head of the Department of Education, when he was governing in a secular way in Medina, was appointing a woman to the Department of Education, a woman to the Department of Humanitarian Services. So that's just an example. And then when we talk about interfaith work, so I do a lot of interfaith marriages without the non-Muslim converting to Islam. So I have a whole chapter on that. And then we also just published a book under MPV Publishing, Beyond Love and Tradition, where we actually set the tough questions young couples ask. Like, what if I do if my parents don't accept my Jewish husband or my Hindu wife, and so on and so forth, right? So we have a book just to answer those tough questions about raising children in an interfaith marriage and so on. And it's really quite simple. And so every time when I have to conduct some marriages, I have to actually really then educate the couples themselves about the permissibility of such a marriage. And also I sometimes have to give a short sermon lecture with the parents, because they have this very patriarchal and tribal interpretation of Islam. And so just in marriage itself, it's so interesting. Most mosques will not marry, I would say 99% will not marry a Muslim to a non-Muslim without the non-Muslim converting. However, in the Quran, there's chapter 2, verse 256. There's no compulsion in faith, meaning no one should be forced into marriage, no matter what the condition is. And then we have the story of Prophet Muhammad, how his daughter, was married to a man in the pagan tribe called the Quraysh. This Qurayshi tribe tried to assassinate him many times, and that was the very tribe that his daughter was married to. He never forced her to divorce him. He never forced him to convert to Islam. He just basically is he a good father, husband, provider? Then that's it. That's it. It's you. It's your life. And so, in the tradition of the tribalism days, when the women, and until today in some societies, like in some Hindu weddings, for example, in India, when the girl marries, they become the property of the husband and the husband's family. That's patriarchy at the max. And so Islam has undermined that patriarchal structure, that tribal structure, by saying, women, you have the right in marriage. You can stipulate what that marriage contract is, what your right is in the marriage. So that's how we use theology in our form of social justice. And even like in Medina, Prophet Muhammad had covenants with the Jewish tribe and Christian tribes to protect them until the end of time. But those are the good stuff that we are not taught You know, we're taught about what does the Quran say about Jews, you know, all this horrific stuff, but it's very specific of a particular event in history. So I can go on and on about that, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. So my book really weaves in a lot of the theology, the basis for that social justice work, and the real, in real terms and in current times. Yeah. Let's go to this young woman and then Jamal.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here and just sharing a lot about, I mean, at least I'm sure you haven't shared everything, but it's nice to be here. And we just came from class, so we talk a lot about what it means to be Muslim American. We talk a lot about different lived experiences. And I think my name is Safia, and was born and raised Muslim, grew up in Tunisia, North Africa. So coming here also, we have to juggle a lot of differences and changes. And I think, I heard I think if I heard you correctly, there is you were born in Malaysia, was born in Tunisia. Definitely my lived experience is definitely different from yours, and I wonder how those lived experience also shape how we approach our faith, and especially for women who's in the United States. And I think the question is, how do a lot of Muslim women, feminist Muslim women, are often caught between either abiding by the rules of Western hegemonic feminism that is white in essence, and also the patriarchal interpretation of the tradition. So I think, how do we navigate? Because where do we stand in our own intersecting identity as being both? But also, earlier I heard something, and maybe if you can talk a lot, because we talk a lot about this in our class. You said, I want to be part of my community, but also I'm American, I have self-determination. And a lot of times, the word American denotes something good about it, which I think it's complicated. Yeah. What does it mean to be American? And also, it's also always put in contradiction to being Muslim, because being Muslim can be bad, and being American can have values of freedom, of self-determination, which denotes that being Muslim is also it carries. And I'm not saying it doesn't. I think our interpretation, and that's very important work of deconstructing. But then when we are constructing a new possibility, what is at stake? Thank you.
So I have 2 stories about Tunisia in my book, because I've done work in Tunisia. I was launching Imams for Shia in Tunisia, and of course I got a lot of pushback, criticism from the Islamists, but I also got criticism from the secular feminist Tunisian women. They say, how dare you put Islam and human rights in the same sentence? You know, so it's a real hard push. So I think that, first of all, I think there's a lot of similarities between the best of American values and Islam. And so when people say in our culture, particularly in the Muslim societies here, oh, you can't be American because it's anti-Islam, which is not true, because Islam is about justice. Islam is about your self-determination and your happiness. But that's not what they teach us, because that's patriarchy. And so American values is also justice for all. At least that's the aspiration, right? And there's a lot of good things in American system and American thinking about the individualism and the human rights and the social justice structures here. You know, the history of faith. I mean, like Martin Luther King and his faith language, that's how we got the civil rights, you know? But somehow we lost that along the way. Somehow we've separated the good faith with human rights and social justice. And that's such a pity. And I think that has a lot to do with the left and the politics of the left. But we're seeing that also coming back. We're seeing how religion is being used on the left to affirm social justice, to affirm human rights. And it's the most powerful language that you can use to justify human rights. So, but there's no contradiction. So everything that I do and how I describe is so Islamic at its heart, and at the same time so American at its heart. And so it's not a contradiction, and that's something that we have to unwire, to separate, because that's how we are told in Muslim societies. You know, don't be so American. But for me, being American is a good thing. In the best parts of America, obviously, you know, there's spectrums, but yeah. Yeah.
I don't need the mic. That's okay.
Yeah.
What? Oh, we do. Okay, fine. What was there a defining moment that made you start MPV?
Yes. So I was in the music business for 20 years, and then I won an award. I won a songwriting Grammy certification, and as an outsider, working towards a particular vision and mission and goal, and then you get it, and then you feel nothing, then it was like, okay, I knew right then and there was something really more valuable for my purpose in life, what am I about? So, but I kind of like sat on it, and I think I want to say this, and I forgot to say this yesterday to this young person in the audience, but if you're watching and you're young, I think don't be afraid to really sit in yourself, in your thoughts, whether you call it prayer, you call it meditation, whatever it is. Be open to what the universe has to offer you. And I wasn't until I was much older. But then so obviously, I know how to write, I know how to produce, that's what I do for a living. But then, and then 9/11 happened. And then I remembered when I was sitting on a plane, when I was 18 years old, like 20 years before then, I was sitting on a plane with this elderly white woman in Illinois, and we had a really nice conversation. And then when we were about to part ways, she asked me, "You seem like a really nice young lady. What church do you go to?" And then I said, "I'm Muslim." And then she goes, "Oh, I've never heard of that church before." And so I was like, holy cow, where's my dad sending me? So when I decided to do an Islamic pop CD to counter the alpha male environment we were living after 9/11, because it was all about going to war, and you had all these patriarchs representing all of American Muslims, and I was like, who are they representing? Because they're not representing us. And so I felt that it was important for me to contribute into that narrative as a female singing voice and in the musical form, and to do. What's that? And to do so in a musical form. And so I put I produced an album, and it was called Ummah Wake Up. And so in the lyrics, I talk about Khadija, who was Prophet Muhammad's wife, first loving wife, who was the financial backer of the early society of Islam. Without her, we would not have the Muslim community we have today. The egalitarian values within the Quran. And so I'm doing this whole production with all the musical instrumentation, and then I find out that it was quote-unquote haram according to the traditional Muslim institutions. So nobody would sell my CD within the Muslim community, and I'm like, what the heck? And I'm from Malaysia and Tunisia and all these places in the Muslim majority country, we all have music. Like, why is this like? So I was like, okay, I'm so done with you guys, I'm out. And that's why I started Muslims for Progressive Values, to create a community for myself as a Muslim and an immigrant. I didn't have family and friends in LA. And also at a time when I was in the music business, I was pretty closeted about my Muslim identity, you know. So that was also not healthy. So that also helped inform me about my LGBTQ advocacy as well. And so I think it's very important to be your whole true self, and uncompromisingly so, because that's the only way you can be happy with yourself, and it's only when you're happy with yourself that you can contribute to society in a positive way. And so all of that is so interconnected with each other, but that was the reason why I started Muslims for Progressive Values, was to defy the patriarchal system and belief system within the Muslim societies in America in a way that was so extremely misogynistic, and I was not having it.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.